This is Ronald. For over 40 years, he swept floors and pumped gas for a living. He wore the same worn jacket for years, patched at the elbow rather than replaced. He drove an old car long after most people would have upgraded. To anyone who passed him on the street, he looked like exactly what he was, a quiet man doing ordinary work. When he died, he left behind $8 million. Nobody who knew him saw it coming. Not his neighbors, not his coworkers, not even most of his own family. The number was so far outside what anyone expected that it made local news, then national news, then became one of those stories people can't stop repeating at dinner parties for years afterward. Around the same time, in a very different part of the country, a Harvard-educated Wall Street executive filed for bankruptcy. He had the degree. He had the salary. He had, for a long stretch of his life, every marker of financial success that Ronald never had. And yet he ended up with nothing. Same country, same era. Two men who never met, living out two completely different relationships with money. It's tempting to turn this into a simple story. Frugal janitor good, spendthrift executive bad. But that framing misses almost everything interesting about what actually happened to both of them. Let's start with Ronald. Every month, he did the same small thing. He bought a little stock in solid, unglamorous companies. Not what was trending. Not whatever a magazine cover was excited about that particular year. Just steady, established businesses, the kind of stock picks that would put most people to sleep if you tried to talk about them at a party. Then he did the hardest part of the entire process. Nothing. No panic selling when the market dropped. No chasing whatever was hot. Just quiet repetition, decade after decade, long after it seemed like absolutely nothing was happening. And for most of those decades, nothing dramatic was visible. This is worth sitting with, because it's the part people skip over when they tell this story as pure inspiration. If you'd invested $10,000 and earned a steady 10% a year, after 10 years you'd have about $26,000. Solid, but nothing worth bragging about. After 20 years, somewhere around 67,000. Still not the kind of number that changes how anyone sees you. It's only after 30, 40 years of that same unglamorous 10% that the number stops looking modest and starts looking enormous. The growth in the final decade alone can be larger than everything that happened in the first three combined. Compounding doesn't announce itself. It just quietly accumulates in the background while life goes on, right up until the moment it suddenly doesn't look quiet anymore. Ronald lived through all of those quiet decades. He kept his job as a janitor even after he technically didn't need to work anymore, because it turns out a lot of people who build wealth this way don't actually do it for the money. They do it because the process itself, showing up, being useful, keeping a simple routine, is its own kind of satisfaction. Now, the executive. His story is worth taking seriously too, because it's rarely as reckless as people assume. He didn't lose his fortune in one dramatic, headline-worthy crash. Nobody's downfall usually works that way. It happens slowly, in small, individually reasonable decisions. A house slightly bigger than he needed, because his income at the time made it feel affordable. A car upgraded every couple of years, because that's simply what people at his level did. Dinners, vacations, memberships, things that felt earned after years of hard work and long hours. Each decision, taken on its own, made complete sense. Nobody looking at any single choice would have called it reckless. It was the accumulation of all of them, stacked year after year, that quietly emptied an account that should have had plenty in it. This is often how financial collapse actually happens for people with real incomes. Not one bad decision, but hundreds of reasonable-seeming ones that never left enough room for anything to compound in the background the way Ronald's quiet stock purchases did. Here's something worth sitting with, because it cuts both ways. The person driving the new car isn't necessarily wealthy. They might just be very good at spending. But the person with $8 million sitting quietly in a bank account isn't necessarily wise, either. They might just be very good at saying no to everything, including the things that would have actually mattered to them. Because here's the part of Ronald's story that tends to get left out entirely. Ronald talked about a trip he wanted to take, for years, and never took it. He mentioned fixing the roof more than once, and never got around to it. He said no to a long list of small joys, over and over, in service of a future he was quietly building. And then, at 92, he ran out of time to actually live inside the future he'd spent his whole life preparing for. The executive made close to the opposite mistake. He spent, consistently, to feel something. status, excitement, a sense of having arrived somewhere. And by most accounts, it never quite worked, not permanently. There was always a slightly bigger house, a slightly newer car, a slightly more impressive vacation that seemed like it might finally deliver the feeling he was chasing. It didn't. So here are two men, two very different relationships with money. And if you're waiting for this to resolve into a tidy lesson about which one of them got it right, it doesn't, because neither of them did. One had the number, whatever his actual enough would have looked like, and never let himself use it. The other never had a number at all, no real sense of enough, just an endless moving target that kept sliding further away every time he got close. Maybe that's the actual question worth carrying away from both of their stories. Not should I live like Ronald, or should I live like the executive? Because both of those questions assume one of them had it figured out. The more useful question is simpler and considerably harder to sit with. What is your number? Not a vague, someday figure you'll get around to calculating eventually, but something close to real. How much would actually be enough for the specific life you want to live, while you still have time left to live it? It's a question that doesn't come with a clean answer, and it isn't supposed to. Ronald's $8 million didn't buy him the trip he wanted. The executive's spending never bought him the feeling he was chasing. Somewhere between those two extremes is presumably a version of enough that actually works, and it's going to look different for almost everyone who's watching this right now. There are stories just like this hidden in dozens of other books, each one asking a version of the same uncomfortable question in a different way. I'll be telling one every week, and trying to ask the questions the book itself doesn't always ask. Subscribe if you want the next one.